People around to key politicians, representatives, and senators began lobbying very heavily, and was able to keep this gun program alive despite an overwhelming sentiment against it.
They didn't realize that there would be this ensuing scrutiny of the request, and therefore, when a little bit of sunshine, which is a great disinfectant, was shed on this particular request, and the relationship between the current president and the former president and this particular weapon system, maybe at that point it was decided we'd better not deal with this, and so they didn't.
Eventually the noise around that got so strong that there was really nothing left to do but to cancel this gun program. And Donald Rumsfeld did cancel the program in a very public ceremony, but not until the gun had been kept alive long enough that the company, United Defense, was able to go public. It did very well, and the Carlyle Group made $237 million in that one day.
And what happened to you?
Well, I was excoriated in the press. I was vilified. I was called unpatriotic. And then a very strange thing happened in my election. I'm a Democrat. What the Republicans did was the Republicans went out and got a black woman who was a Republican to run as a Democrat in my Democratic primary. And then 47,000 Republicans crossed over and voted in my Democratic primary. And of course, they had done their homework and their research, and they realized that generally on average, I would get about 48,000 votes on a primary. Generally on average. Look, give or take 100 here, 100 there, but generally it's about 48,000. So what the Republicans did, and this was not just a mere accident. This, of course, was planned. And they made sure that at least 47,000, and we can name them. We have their names, addresses, telephone numbers, so we know 47,000 right, to match the number of Democrats that would generally turn out, voted in my election. And, of course, I couldn't, of course, in the circumstances like that, come out on the with the longer stick when the election tally had ended.
People should ask questions about Carlyle. The problem is, what member of Congress, Democrat or Republican, wants to go and criticize a grandfatherly former U.S. president whose son happens to be the sitting president? I mean, why don't you just take a gun and shoot your leg off? I mean, it is not going to be very popular in Washington, D.C. You're not going to be invited to White House dinners. You're going to be shut out on the Hill when you deal with certain members who won't forget that you trashed a former president and his son.
If you have an organization that is able to operate behind the scenes without real accountability, and that same organization has the ability to ruin political careers for people who are a little bit too inquisitive or a little bit too honest, or to shape public thinking, then we have the means for a kind of control globally that is probably unprecedented.
It's sort of like shadow boxing with a ghost. You can't find the ghost. You can't read their reports because they're privately held, and there's no obvious litigation against them. No one in Congress has had a hearing about them. They're so powerful, no one wants to touch it because of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. Just kidding. So we have this problem here. This is a mysterious, immensely powerful company with virtually no scrutiny.
In the White House view, there's no ethical conflict in former President Bush and former Secretary of State, Jim Baker, using their world contacts with world leaders to represent one of the most well-known military arms dealers, the Carlyle Group.
The President has full faith that his family will conform with all proper ethics laws, and will act properly in their conduct, and that's exactly what they've been done, and there are no questions that we can.
It's okay for former President Bush to go to the Middle East leaders and sell guns and tanks and planes?
Again, the President has full confidence that all members of his family are acting in full accordance with all ethics laws.
On September 11th, in somewhat of a horrible coincidence, the Carlyle Group was holding their annual investor meeting here in Washington, D.C., at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. George Bush Sr. was at the meeting. The Carlyle Group said that he left the night before September 11th and was on his way to some location in the Midwest. And I talked to someone who was at the meeting, and they told me that the whole crew of Carlyle, including Frank Carlucci and James Baker and David Rubenstein, along with Shafiq bin Laden, who was a representative of the bin Laden family and their fortunes, were all in the same room together watching the events of September 11th take place. I was totally shocked. I just couldn't believe that all of these people were in the same room watching these events happen. You know, it's just to see a confluence of international people of such political influence and intrigue to be gathered at the same place at the same time while something that affects all of them in completely different ways took place was just an amazing scene in my mind.
One of the more embarrassing things that happened was after September 11th, it emerged that the bin Laden family construction company had some money in Carlyle. And after initially denying this, it ended up that George Herbert Walker Bush had met with members of the bin Laden family in one of his trips to Saudi Arabia.
The bin Laden family had been introduced to Carlyle many years before President Bush ever became associated with Carlyle. And they were introduced in a quite legitimate way as a potential investor in one of our investment funds, which they did invest in. And in addition, we offered up and did perform certain financial advisory work in connection with an investment they were thinking about, and indeed one that they did make in the United States, where there was simply hard business analysis and advice rendered. I can tell you, Bakr bin Laden, in his wildest imagination, I suspect, never imagined that Osama would go and do what he did. So then you roll forward 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden 9/11 has happened, and the first thing you know is, well, President Bush is associated with Carlyle, and Carlyle has some bin Laden money. Well, what's going on here?
The relationships between Carlyle and Saudi Arabia began when Steve Norris developed a very nascent relationship with Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, who is a very wealthy, very flamboyant Saudi Arabian prince who loves the United States and loves to invest his money in the United States.
There was always a running joke. You know, there's always been periods where there were excess capital, and people would try to figure out how to access that. For a while it was the Japanese, and it's always been the Kuwaitis and so forth.
And now it was the Saudis.
And that was the Saudis, and people would say, let's try to find a prince to do something. I mean, it was the kind of thing you just said. It was humorous, and no one really... So I remember when I got a call from Dick Paulson saying, we have a prince we want you to talk to. I said, right, what else do you want me to do? What are you trying to do here? Do you want me taking a lunch? I mean, what is it you really want? He said, no, you got to take this seriously. So I said, all right, okay. Because everybody had heard these stories for years. Prince Al-Walid is the grandson of the founder of the kingdom. It's Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, and Prince Talal, his father, had actually spent a fair amount of time around Washington. In fact, owned a major estate in Washington at one point in time.
At the time, this was in the early 90s, Citigroup, which is America's largest bank, was faltering. It was in serious trouble. It was in danger of declaring bankruptcy. And Steve was able to put together a deal between the Prince and Citigroup in which the Prince invested $590 million into Citicorp. And an investment like this was enough to save the bank, and it was a big deal. It was the biggest deal that Carlyle had ever made.
But then through the Prince, you got also in contact with the other
yes,
people
through the profile and then, as I said, we'd hired this gentleman, Basil Rahim, to introduce us, and so we went to meet with a number of Saudi families. And in fact, as you know, one of the families that was introduced to Carlyle and to me in those days was the bin Laden family.
The reason that all of this was able to happen is that the United States had just completed the Gulf War in, I think, 1990.